The days passed quietly after that night under the stars. Ethan and Nita worked side by side at the small ranch, their lives slowly weaving together like threads of the same cloth. The early mornings were filled with the sound of Duke's hooves and the smell of fresh coffee. Nita would hum softly as she cooked breakfast, and Ethan would listen without saying a word. Something peaceful had come into his life, something he hadn't known he needed. He built a small garden near the cabin where she planted herbs and corn. Her hands were gentle but strong, and she taught him how to use desert plants for healing. When Ethan cut his arm fixing a fence, she wrapped it with herbs and cloth, whispering old Apache words he didn't understand but somehow found comforting each day. They grew closer, though neither spoke of it directly. The silence between them was not empty anymore. It was full of understanding. Ethan admired her courage, how she had survived pain and loss, yet still found reasons to smile. And Nita saw in him something rare in the West, a man with a kind heart in a hard world. But peace in the West never lasted long. One afternoon, Ethan rode into the nearby town of Dry Creek to trade supplies. When he entered the store, he noticed men whispering near the counter. One of them was the same bandit who had threatened him weeks ago. The man gave Ethan a hard look and smirked. "Still keeping that Apache girl hidden, rancher?" he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Ethan ignored him, but the man stood up. "You know there's a bounty on her head," he said. "Army's paying good money for any Indian caught wandering these parts. You should hand her over before they come asking." The store went silent. Ethan looked the man in the eyes. "She's not yours to take," he said firmly. The man's grin faded. "You'll regret that, Cole," he said again. "You can't fight the law forever." Ethan didn't answer. He paid for his goods and left. But as he rode home, a cold feeling settled in his stomach. He knew they wouldn't let it go easily. The West had no mercy for anyone different, and even less for those who tried to protect them. When he returned, Nita was waiting outside. She could tell by his eyes that something was wrong. "They know," Ethan said simply. "We may have to leave." She looked around the land that had become their home, the hills, the trees, the cabin that sheltered them from storms. "This our place," she said softly. "We stay. No more running." Ethan wanted to argue, but he saw the strength in her eyes. She had been running all her life. Maybe it was time to stand still. So he stayed too, though he started keeping his rifle close and his horse ready. For a few days nothing happened. Life returned to its rhythm. They fixed fences, fetched water, and shared quiet dinners by the fire. At night, they talked about small things where she grew up, what her people believed, how the stars guided them across the land. Ethan listened carefully, as if her words could heal something old inside him, but then, one night, the silence was broken again. The distant thunder of horses came from the canyon road. Ethan stepped outside and saw torches flickering in the dark. His heart sank. There were at least 6 riders. He rushed back inside. "They're here," he said. Nita's face went pale, but her voice was calm. "We faced them together." Ethan nodded. He checked the windows and loaded his rifle. The men surrounded the cabin, shouting, "Come out, Cole. We know she's in there." Ethan called back, "You'll find nothing here but trouble." The night air was tense. Then a voice shouted, "You've got till sunrise, or we burn this place down." For hours, the men stayed outside, drinking and laughing, waiting for dawn. Inside, Ethan and Nita sat near the fire, holding on to hope in silence. She reached for his hand and said quietly, "If I die, you live. You go." He looked at her, his voice steady. "No, if I go, I take you with me. That's a promise." She didn't argue. She just looked at him with tears that didn't fall. For the first time, she felt safe not because of walls or weapons, but because someone cared enough to stay. When the first light touched the sky, Ethan moved to the back of the cabin. He had built a hidden trail behind the barn that led toward the hills. "We can make it if we're fast," he said. Nita nodded. They slipped out quietly, moving through the morning fog. But one of the bandits spotted them. "They're running," he shouted. Gunshots echoed through the hills. Ethan pushed Nita ahead, leading her toward the canyon. The sound of horses grew louder behind them. They reached the stream near the rocks, where Ethan turned and fired a warning shot. It hit the dirt near the riders, scattering them for a moment. "Go!" he shouted. Nita hesitated but then ran toward the trees. Ethan followed close behind. They ran for what felt like hours until they reached an old abandoned mine. They took shelter inside, breathing heavily. Dust floated in the air, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the walls. Ethan's shirt was torn, and Nita's hands were trembling. "They'll come," she whispered. "Let them," Ethan said, trying to sound brave. But inside he was scared not for himself but for her. They waited in the shadows as footsteps approached outside. Voices echoed, searching. Ethan held his breath, his hand on the rifle. The men passed by slowly, their torches lighting the mouth of the cave, but they didn't come inside. After a while, the sound of hooves faded away. Nita exhaled deeply. "We live another day," she said quietly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Seems so." They stayed there until sunset, then returned to the cabin when it was safe. The door was broken, and their things were scattered. The bandits had taken what they could and left the rest. But the cabin still stood, stubborn and strong, like the two souls who lived there. Ethan rebuilt the door that night. Nita helped gather wood for a new fire. When they finally sat down, tired but alive, she looked at him and said, "You lose everything for me." Ethan shook his head. "I didn't lose anything. I found something worth keeping." Tears filled her eyes. She took his hand and pressed it to her heart. "My people say to spirits that survive storm together belong to same wind." Ethan didn't fully understand her words, but he understood her meaning. He smiled, and for the first time, she smiled back without fear. Weeks later, soldiers came to Dry Creek asking questions. The townsfolk told them the rancher and the Apache woman had left for the north. In truth, Ethan and Nita had moved deeper into the wilderness, far beyond the trails of men. They built a new cabin by a river where wildflowers grew and the sound of water filled the air. Life there was quiet but full. Ethan hunted, Nita fished, and gathered berries. Together, they planted seeds and watched them grow. Some nights, they sat by the fire, and Nita told stories of her ancestors, the spirit of the wolf, the wind that carried prayers, the stars that never forgot a promise. Ethan listened as if each word was a treasure. Years passed. The world around them changed, but their small world stayed the same. People in nearby towns whispered about a mysterious couple who lived by the river, an Apache woman and a rancher who never returned to town. Some said they were ghosts, others said they were legends, but those who rode near their valley sometimes heard laughter through the trees or saw smoke rising from a chimney at sunset. They said if you followed the sound, you'd find a cabin where two lives once lost had found peace. Ethan and Nita never sought fame or gold. All they wanted was freedom to live as they chose. Away from the noise of men who couldn't understand love beyond boundaries, and so their story became part of the land itself. Whispered by the wind that passed over the canyons and sung by the rivers that never stopped flowing. The Wild West might have been harsh and wild, but it was also where two hearts found a home no one could take away. Their lives were bound forever, not by chains or laws, but by kindness, courage, and love born in the dust and stars of the untamed West. The sun was going down behind the desert hills, painting the sky in orange and red. The dry wind carried dust across the empty land, whispering through the tall grass. Ethan Cole rode slowly on his horse, Duke. He had been alone most of his life, living quietly on a small ranch far from town. The sound of the saddle creaking and the wind against his hat were the only things that kept him company. He didn't mind being alone. The Wild West had taken much from him already. Years ago, he had lost his brother during a robbery gone wrong. Since then, he stayed away from people in trouble. That evening, as he rode toward home, Ethan heard something strange in the distance. At first, it was faint like the cry of a bird, but then it came again, softer, weaker. It sounded human. He stopped his horse and listened closely. The sound came from the canyon ahead. Without wasting time, he turned Duke toward the narrow trail. He had no idea who it was, but in the West, Leaving someone behind could mean leaving them to die. As he rode closer, he saw a small shape lying near the rocks. He jumped down from his horse and ran to it. There, half hidden by dry bushes, was a young woman. Her long dark hair was tangled, her face pale and tired. Her ankle was swollen, and her clothes were torn from walking through rough ground. Ethan knelt beside her. Her eyes opened in fear, wide and alert. She tried to move away, whispering something in Apache, but she was too weak. "It's all right," Ethan said quietly. "You're safe now." He pulled the canteen from his saddle and placed it near her. She hesitated, then took it with shaking hands and drank slowly. He could see she hadn't eaten or slept in days. The sun had dropped below the hills now, and the air was getting colder. Coyotes howled in the distance. Ethan looked at her, then at the sky. Leaving her there wasn't an option. "You can't stay here," he said softly. "I've got a cabin not far from here. You'll freeze if you stay." The woman didn't reply, but gave a small nod. When she tried to stand, her leg gave out. Ethan caught her gently. She was light as a feather. He lifted her up and placed her carefully on his horse. Then he walked beside Duke, guiding the horse down the rough path under the pale moonlight. The journey was slow and quiet. The stars appeared one by one above them, and the wind turned colder. Ethan could hear her soft breathing behind him. He didn't know who she was, but something about her made him feel like he had to keep her safe. When they finally reached his cabin, it was near midnight. The small wooden house stood between tall pines beside a dry stream. Smoke from the fire pit drifted faintly in the night air. Ethan helped her down, opened the door, and brought her inside. The cabin was simple, just a bed, a small table, and a fire that still glowed faintly. He sat her near the fire, gave her a blanket, started to warm up some beans and bread. After a few minutes, she whispered something. "Why, you help me?" Her voice was soft, carrying both fear and confusion. Ethan looked at her. "Because it's what a man should do," he said simply. She lowered her eyes, still holding the blanket tightly. Her name, she told him later, was Nita. She was from an Apache camp a few days away. Her people had been scattered after a fight with settlers. She had been running for days, hiding from soldiers and wild animals, trying to find her way back home. But the desert was cruel, and her body had finally given up. Ethan didn't ask more. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the pain of someone who had lost everything. He gave her some food, made sure she had water, and told her to rest. He took his blanket and slept on the floor near the door, his rifle beside him. The West could be a dangerous place, and strangers didn't always come alone. The next morning, Ethan went outside early to fetch water from the stream. The air was cool, and the sound of birds filled the valley. When he came back, Nita was awake, sitting by the fire with quiet eyes. She looked stronger already. When he handed her a cup of coffee, she smiled faintly. It was the first time he saw her smile. "You can stay here until you heal," Ethan said. "Then we'll find your people." Days passed slowly but peacefully. Nita began to walk again, though she still limped a little. She helped around the cabin, cooking meals and cleaning. She sang softly, while she worked songs in her native tongue that sounded both sad and beautiful. Ethan didn't understand the words, but he liked listening to her voice. It filled the silence that had lived in the cabin for too long. He taught her how to feed the horse, how to gather firewood, and how to make coffee. She laughed when he tried to teach her English words, often mispronouncing them in a way that made both of them laugh. Slowly, the cabin no longer felt lonely. It felt like home. But the Wild West never stayed quiet for long. One afternoon, while Ethan was fixing the corral fence, he saw dust rising in the distance. 3 riders were coming fast. His gut told him trouble was near. He called out for Nita to stay inside, then waited by the gate. The men rode up with rifles slung across their backs and rough smiles on their faces. They were bandits, the kind that lived off fear and greed. "Evenin' Cole," the leader said with a sneer. "Heard you've been keeping company? That true?" Ethan said nothing. The man nodded toward the cabin window. "She one of them Apaches, ain't she? There's bounty on her kind. We could use the coin." Ethan's jaw tightened. "She's under my roof," he said calmly. You'll leave now. The men laughed. You think you can stop us? One of them said, stepping off his horse. Ethan didn't raise his gun. He didn't need to. His tone was steady as stone. If you take one step closer, you'll find out. For a moment, the wind was the only sound between them. Something in Ethan's eyes made the men hesitate. Finally, the leader spat on the ground. You'll regret it, he said. Then they turned their horses and rode away, their laughter fading into the distance. Ethan watched until they disappeared. When he turned around, Nita stood in the doorway, fear in her eyes. They come for me, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe, but they'll have to come through me first. That night, neither of them spoke much. The fire crackled softly, throwing warm light on their faces. She sat close to him, and for the first time, she reached out and touched his hand gently. Ethan looked at her but said nothing. He didn't have to. The silence between them spoke enough. Days later, Nita's ankle healed completely. Ethan told her he would help her find her people, but she looked away. My people gone far, she said quietly. I don't know where. I stay here. If you want me gone, I go when sunrise. Ethan shook his head. No one's asking you to leave. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she smiled fully warm and grateful. That moment, Ethan realized something deep inside him had changed. The loneliness he once accepted now felt distant, replaced by something gentle and alive. But deep in his heart, he knew the West wouldn't let them live in peace forever. There were still men who wanted to hunt her, soldiers who wouldn't care about her story. That night, the moon rose high above the valley, silver light touching the land around the cabin. Ethan sat outside on the porch, his rifle resting on his knee. Nita stepped out quietly and stood beside him. Together they looked at the endless stars above them. She spoke softly. Maybe sky, same for you and me, she said. Different people. Same stars. Ethan smiled. Maybe that's how it should be. The wind blew gently through the pine trees. The Wild West was still wild, but for the first time, Ethan didn't feel alone. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. Somehow, somewhere along the road, she had become a part of his life, and deep in his heart, he knew this meeting wasn't chance. It was destiny quietly written under the same sky that watched over them both.